Hi, and welcome to Iftinka Aqliga. Today we will be talking about an article from Memory on how Saudi Arabia is amending thousands of scribal errors in the Quran. This article was originally written for Memory. Since content criticizing Islam is slowly being wiped from the internet, we wanted to preserve this for future references. Please use this link for the article in Memory in the description box below. The article reads, Two unusual articles published this year on Saudi websites call to amend scribal errors in the Quran and also to re-examine religious texts in light of modern perceptions, so as to make them more readable and adapt them to the present age. The articles are exceptional since Muslims regard the Quranic text as divine and therefore perfect. As a result, clear instances of scribal errors in the text have never been amended. An article published January 10, 2020 by Saudi journalist Ahmed Hisham on the Saudi Opinions website pointed out that the Quran as it is known today was written down after the Prophet's lifetime, in the period of the third Caliph, Uthman bin Affan, who ruled between 644 and 656, using the Uthmanic script, which is named after him. Since this writing system is a human invention, argues Hashim, there is no reason to sanctify it, as many Muslims do. In fact, he says it is time to correct some 2,500 errors of spelling and grammar that was made by the scribes in that period and remain part of the Quranic script and text to this day. He presents numerous examples of such spelling mistakes and calls to rewrite the words in their present-day standard form so as to make the text more readable for present-day Muslims and more linguistically correct. A second article was published on July 20th, 2020 on the liberal Saudi website Ilaf by Jarjis Gulizada, a writer and political analyst of Kurdish Iraqi origin and the editor of the Iraqi magazine Baghdad. He notes that during the coronavirus pandemic, for the first time in Islamic history, changes were made to the form of Islamic worship when Muslims were permitted to maintain physical distance from one another during prayer, instead of praying in tight rows as the Quran instructs. This, he says, shows that there is room for flexibility in Islam, and that the same flexibility can be applied to the Islamic texts, which should be re-examined and adapted to modern perceptions so as to benefit the Muslims and mankind at large. Mentioning Ahmed Hisham's article, he too argues that it is irrational to treat the Uthmani script of the Quran as sacred, and presents further examples of errors that appear in the Quran, in addition to those presented by Hashim. He calls to publish an amended version of the Quran using modern spelling because, in its present form, it is not suitable for the Islamic nation in the modern world, and especially for non-Arab Muslims, and states that this task should be undertaken by Saudi Arabia, specifically by its king and crown prince. It should be noted that Gulizada's article was removed from the Ilaf website following furious reactions on social media from users who accuse the Saudis, and in particular Ilaf chief editor Uthman al-Umair, of insolence and of insulting the Quran. For example, Kuwaiti academic Dr. Ahmed al-Dairi tweeted, "The Ilaf website, directed by Saudi journalist Uthman al-Umair, calls to rewrite the Quran in order to fix the great mistakes of the Uthmani script. Has their contempt reached the point of harming Allah's book?" The Towards Freedom Twitter account, known for criticizing the Saudi regime, stated, "The Ilaf online paper, managed by Uthman al-Umair, a close friend of King Salman and an advisor to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, demands to rewrite the Quran and re-examine the principles of this Islamic Sharia. The only thing left is to return the idols to the Kaaba." The following are translated excerpts from Ahmed Hisham's and Jarjis Gulizada's articles. Saudi journalist: "The Quranic text, as we know it, contains some 2,500 mistakes of spelling and grammar." In his January 10, 2020 article titled amending the Quran, Saudi journalist Ahmed Hisham wrote, "The Quran as we know it was written down during the period of the third Caliph, Uthman bin Affan, using the Uthmani script, which is named after him. Most Muslims believe that this version of the Quran, which was written in the 37th year after the Hijrah, when the compiling of the Quran was completed and has been passed down from generation to generation to this very day, is sacred and must not be amended." I do have to make a call out here, and this is not written in the article, but till today we do not have a complete copy of the Uthmanic Quran. But returning to the article, however, the Quran in its present form contains errors of spelling, syntax, and grammar. It is estimated that there are about 2,500 such mistakes. They were made by the committee tasked with compiling the Quran and include the addition or omission of letters in some words or the substitution of one letter for another. The Uthmanic script in which the Quran is written was formed by several of the Prophet's companions and several members of the following generation, and they deserve credit for the effort they made according to their ability at the time. However, the legacy they left us can be developed and amended if there is a better and more convenient alternative, as was done in later years when diacritics and punctuation marks were added to the Quranic text. The time has come to amend the spelling errors and other errors it contains and adapt it to the rules of the Arabic language and grammar. For the Quranic text is open to any amendment that will make Allah's book easier for Muslims to read and linguistically more correct. Kurdish Iraqi researcher, the Quran should be amended. Islamic texts should be re-examined, adapted to the modern age. Jarjis Gulizada, a writer and political analyst of Kurdish Iraqi origin, wrote in a July 20th, 2020 article called "A Call for Rewriting the Quran." One of the most important changes made during the coronavirus pandemic on the religious Islamic level involved stopping people from praying in tight rows, as accepted in the Islamic Sharia. In order to protect people's lives, worshippers were permitted to maintain a distance from one another, although this contravenes the Islamic texts. Furthermore, public prayers and Friday and holiday prayers at the mosque was banned in order to protect the worshippers and prevent them from infecting one another with the virus. This is a clear violation of the religious texts, but it is permitted following in-depth study in order to save lives. The important point is that there was room for flexibility, and therefore a lenient religious ruling was issued and imposed on our present Islamic reality. For the first time in Islamic history since the days of the righteous caliphs, the first four caliphs who ruled after the Prophet, this flexibility allowed making essential changes to the mode of worship, with the sole purpose of saving lives. The ruling was issued based on the Quranic golden rule that Allah does not charge a soul except with that within its capacity. Quran, Surah 2, Ayah 286, which forms the logical and rational basis for the changes that were made. Even if such changes are rare and were made only now, in our modern reality, they constitute a first sign, a very encouraging one, that a re-examination of the Islamic texts and of Islamic ritual is taking place. This was done based on modern perceptions and objectives that benefit the Muslims in our modern world. Given that the coronavirus pandemic prompted such changes on the global, regional, and local levels, in the domain of religion and faith, and especially in the domain of Islamic ritual, I call on all the Islamic religious authorities to re-examine the Islamic legal doctrine as well in the spirit of flexibility based on a modern perception that serves all Muslims. The first issue I urge them to undertake is a re-examination of the Quranic script, namely the Uthmanic script, which is not suitable for the Islamic nation in the modern world, and especially for non-Arab Muslims, due to the difficulty of pronouncing words that are misspelled. Although Sunnis regard the Uthmanic script of the Quran as sacred, The evidence they present for this is irrational because there is no rational basis for attributing sanctity to something man-made such as a script. Moreover, the task of compiling the verses of the Quran and writing each of them was not undertaken in the time of the Prophet, but rather years after his death, in the period of the first Khalif, Abu Bakr, who ruled between 632 and 634. The Quranic canon was written down in the period of the third Khalif, Uthman bin Affan, who ruled 644 till 656, and later copied and distributed throughout the Islamic regions. The Uthmani script contains many inconsistencies and errors involving the mispronunciation and misspelling of words in the verses, yet it remains unchanged to this day, despite the considerable improvements that have been made to the writing, reading, and pronunciation of Arabic over 1,400 years that have passed since then. The errors of the Uthmanic script were discussed in an article titled The Quran by the Saudi writer Ahmed Hashim, who showed, based on the Quranic text, that the Prophet's scribes made errors when they wrote down the Quranic verses. Further examples of discrepancies between the Uthmani script and the modern standard script involving the omission of letters. The greatest error in the Uthmani script 1,441 years ago was writing the word Bakka instead of Mecca in Surah 3, verse 86, which says, "Indeed, the first house of worship established for mankind was that at Becca." Another error was made in verse 55 of Surah 22, which contains the phrase Yom Aqim, or a useless day, instead of Yom Azim, great day, due to the scribal error in which the letter Qaf was substituted for the letter Dha. For some 1,500 years, no credible authority dared to call for correcting Becca to Mecca in Quran 386. For all these reasons, and in order to present the correct form of the text, free of errors and obscurities, it is incumbent upon us, for scientific, rational, religious, and linguistic reasons, to re-examine the Uthmanic script of the Quran and rewrite it in the correct manner so as to amend all the language mistakes that appear in the Quran and remove it from all traces and error. This task should obviously be undertaken by Saudi Arabia, by its king and its crown prince, especially since both of them support plans and projects for modernizing the country from every aspect: economic, social, cultural, religious, and in terms of tourism. I therefore think circumstances are ripe for accepting the idea of reprinting the Quran in modern script without errors and obscurities that were caused by the misspelling of words over 1,400 years ago. In addition, Iraqi Kurdistan may support the publication of a special edition of the Quran for non-Arab Muslims, which will prevent them from mispronouncing the text due to lack of familiarity with the intricacies of the Arabic language. Perhaps the president of Iraqi Kurdistan will endorse this project in light of its spiritual, ideological, and religious importance for the Islamic world. Such a book has in fact been prepared by your humble servant, and it is available for publication should the president be willing to endorse it and print it. Finally, I stress once again that the time has come to look into the Islamic, Christian, and Jewish texts from the rational and logical perspective. It is time for the human mind to become the supreme judge, freeing itself of mysticism and irrationality, amend the textual and ideological mistakes that exist in the religious text due to human error and due to the undeveloped state of the writing system 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. The coronavirus pandemic has opened the gates wide to new changes in every domain, especially in religious ritual, which in the past was impossible. It is time for Islam to join the modern world, and the best rational evidence for this provided by the religion itself is Surah 2, verse 44, which says, "As you read the Quran, will you not reason?" Thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more content.